making his appearance on the Our Nation's sports show. Yes, folks, we had him on our football preview show back in August. We figured why not have him on again? And that's Lance Medow. Lance, how you doing? How you been?
I'm doing very well, guys. Thanks for having me back on the program. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. But well, let's get your take on this with Pittsburgh. We were talking about this in hour number one. You put the blame on them on one specific entity, or is it the entire team?
We're talking about the Steelers, right?
The Steelers,
Correct.
yes.
Yes.
Well, I think that the offensive play calling is one contributing factor. I was very frustrated watching the Steelers all season. I expected them to make a deep postseason run, but their inability to run the football pretty much shot themselves in the foot. It was, I don't know, just in terms of out of frustration, but the fact that you have the personnel up front on the offensive line, and you certainly have the runners because James Conner was back late in the season, and to not want to run the ball, especially in the red zone, to me falls on the play calling entity. I think that's a huge part of it. I do think there were points in the season where the offensive line could have played better, but I'll go back to that Bengals game, guys. If you recall the Monday night game,
Yes.
they were running the ball very effectively. If you go back and you watch that game, and that was a game that James Conner didn't play, and turnovers just came back to haunt them because when you have Ben Roethlisberger throw the ball 40 some odd times, in some games 50 some odd times, guys, I don't care whether you have a polished veteran or an unproven rookie, you're going to continue to put the ball in harm's way eventually with that high volume of throws. So I think it was clearly the execution, it goes without saying, but I also put a lot on the play calling. I expected more balance out of the Steelers offense this season. And for some reason, they just completely went off the deep end and said, you know what, the hell with that.
Right, because during the Washington game, they were throwing the ball constantly in the fourth quarter, and I'm sitting there thinking, like I said at the top of the show today, I'm like, what are you doing? You know, it's you're in the fourth quarter, you're up by 14 plus, and you keep throwing the ball. You got to have, like you said, Lance, you got to have a balanced attack to win these games, and their play calling was ultimately, like you said, their downfall.
Completely with you, Stephen. I think you brought up an excellent point. I mean, you go back to that Washington game, and that was a game that was relatively tight. It wasn't as if they were trailing by double digits for the majority of the game, and even other games I'll point to. You know, it's one thing, if you look at football from a big picture perspective, guys, you're trailing by 15. I get it. You're in the third quarter. You don't have the luxury to run the football, right? You got to start throwing the ball because you're limited in terms of your at-bats, as I like to call it, your possessions. But the Steelers were not playing from behind more often than not in every single game, or even when they were trailing. You never got the feel as if they were in a position where, okay, they've got to be lopsided in terms of their play calling. To me, it was just, hey, we feel we put the ball in Big Ben's hands, we're going to have more success. And while, yeah, you can argue that you like your chances with a veteran quarterback, with the amount of drops that receiving core had, you would think at some point you say to yourself, okay, we're making it too easy on the opposition. Let's pound the ball. Let's try to set the tone on the ground. And even if we're picking up 2 to 3 yards per carry, I'd rather have that than go for the home run and wind up facing a 3rd and 15, which unfortunately was more often than not for the Steelers.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Carl?
I'm sorry. Lance, with right before you came on, we were saying how we weren't shocked that Kansas City's back in the position they are. How did you feel about Kansas City at the beginning of the season?
Well, I felt good about the Chiefs, mainly because if we turn the clock back, as you just alluded to, Carl, you're talking about an unconventional offseason where you had virtual meetings, and any team that had a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator, a lot of new personnel, you didn't have any on-field work. Well, Kansas City had that advantage over everybody else. Why? Because they were bringing back 20 of their 22 starters, which in today's NFL is quite ridiculous. So that they had working in their favor. You didn't lose any of the coordinators because Eric Bieniemy did not get a new gig and Steve Spagnuolo returned. So I felt very good about the Chiefs. I felt that they were going to be the team to beat just based on the landscape of the NFL. You weren't going to find another team that I felt was as well positioned as the Chiefs because of all of the returning coaches and personnel. So I'm not surprised at all, to answer your question, that they're back here in the Super Bowl. I think when you look at the makeup of this season, you would expect the defending Super Bowl champs maintaining continuity to have a humongous advantage over the rest of the league, and that proved to be the case.
Kind of piggybacking off of that for a second, you brought up Eric Bieniemy. Are you surprised that he did not get hired, either in the offseason or any such like that?
Well, I'm surprised that he didn't maybe make it as far into the interview process for a few teams. I would say that, John. But when you look at the fact that, and I brought this up on multiple shows, and I'm curious of even your perspective, guys, as individuals that follow sports very closely. Whenever we talk about the Chiefs and the aggressive play calling, look at the Cleveland Browns game, okay, in the divisional round when he had Chad Henne throw the pass to Tyreek Hill. What was the conversation after the game? It was Andy Reid. He's got a big pair of you-know-what, okay? It was Andy Reid is so clever. Andy Reid is so creative. When did the narrative ever include, boy, what a great job by Eric Bieniemy? What are they doing in that offensive film room? It's amazing what Bieniemy is bringing to the table. And listen, in an ideal world, coaches, owners, executives shouldn't be hired based on what the headlines are in the newspapers. But guys, let's not be naive. Those narratives do help. And that's why you see an assistant maybe at the beginning of the season, you never expected them to have a legitimate shot to get a head coaching gig. And all of a sudden they're a hot commodity. Why? Because people have been talking about them all season. People have been writing about them all season. I don't feel Eric Bieniemy is at the forefront in the conversation when it comes to the Kansas City Chiefs. So that's not to say that he's not capable of being a head coach. I just think until he gets out of the shadow of Andy Reid, and I don't think Andy Reid's doing this to him on purpose. It's just we tend to give the credit when anything goes right on offense to Andy Reid. Until that changes, I think that hurts Eric Bieniemy.
Exactly. HiJacker, I know you said you have a question from our Discord server.
Yeah. How you doing, Lance? I got two questions
well.
for you. I got one from Discord, and then I got one myself that's going to kind of go off to the side a little bit in football. But first, we'll go to Joe in North Carolina. He's asking to you, Lance, how does history view Andy Reid if he fails? Is he still a Hall of Fame worthy coach?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, personally, I think Andy Reid is going to be a Hall of Fame coach, regardless of whether or not he wins or loses this game. And see, my viewpoint, guys, on football is very different than other sports. You ask me about basketball. Basketball is not just about getting there. It's about winning. Why? Because star players have far more influence on the outcome of championship series, I would argue, than in football. You're the quarterback. You're the most important position, okay? Don't get me wrong. But Mahomes is not going out there and playing defense. He's not responsible for slowing down Tom Brady. That's the Chiefs' defense and vice versa. So I look at it the same thing with a head coach. You get there to the Super Bowl. You make the playoffs consistently like Andy Reid has done in a league defined by competitive balance, by parity, whatever term you want to utilize in the salary cap era. It's so hard to maintain consistency in this league. What Reid has been able to do in Philadelphia as well as Kansas City, to me, he's solidified his legacy. You're talking about an Eagles coach that went to 4 straight conference championship games. And this is in the salary cap era, guys. Remember that. And now you're talking about since he's gone into Kansas City, yeah, they haven't made the Super Bowl every year. They haven't made the conference championship game every year, but they've now done it 3 straight years. They're going to the Super Bowl in back-to-back years. And he also, remember, had a huge influence in the Chiefs taking a flyer on Patrick Mahomes and drafting him. So between the personnel decisions, the play calling, the consistency of preparing teams and getting them to the playoffs, what else does this guy have to prove to warrant Hall of Fame status? It doesn't, in my mind, impact him at all if he loses.
Gotcha. And then my personal question, as everybody here on the show knows, I used to be a diehard Raiders fan. The team left me twice. I'm only 10 minutes from the Oakland Coliseum. Been a season ticket holder since '95 until they left. What do you think about Gruden's return? When Del Rio was there, I was a big fan. I loved Gruden 20 years ago when Al Davis originally brought him in. It's good to see him back, but I just don't think he has it. 4-12, 7-9, 8-8. Yes, we're still early in his return, but what is your thoughts on him coming back? Did you think Del Rio could have really continued taking this team up, even though Carr got hurt and they kind of sputtered out of control that year after he was injured. But what is your thoughts with Gruden and the Raiders right now?
Well, first of all, I'm with you. I really like the job Jack Del Rio did when he was with the Raiders. I actually don't think he's received enough credit. Look at what he's doing with the Washington defense this past season. He's a good coach, okay? He knows the fundamentals. He knows how to put players in the right position. And I think he also has the qualities of being that CEO type of guy where he could command the team, he could command the room. And you're right, it's unfortunate that the injuries, I think, is what overshadowed Jack Del Rio's potential of having even more success, because that one year, remember, they look like they're a juggernaut in the AFC. Unfortunately, Carr suffers the ankle injury, and we know the rest is history. So I'm with you there. I like the job Del Rio did, but of course, in the NFL, it's all about being itchy for results, and they made a change. Now, Gruden, I don't doubt his ability to formulate offenses that have success. I think Carr's done a nice job statistically under him, whether it be completion percentage. I mean, I thought Carr played a solid season. Here's my issue with Gruden. I don't think he's caught up in the times in terms of overall making decisions within game flow. That's what I have been a little bit frustrated with, just as somebody who observes the games. Case in point, guys, you go back to the Dolphins game late in the season. It was a must-win situation. Now, I know that we could go back and forth with this. I'm a believer. You take the touchdown when you could get the touchdown. You don't worry about the clock, okay? I want the opposition to go the length of the field. I don't want to make it easy for them to have to just settle for a field goal to tie the game or win the game. So if you remember, they overthought that. And you had Josh Jacobs try to tiptoe and slow himself down. So, you know, those situations, the Chargers game was another one which came down to the wire. They went to overtime. Herbert, remember the QB sneak, got into the end zone. I thought his game management. Now, is this a reflection of not being caught up on the times, being old school, or, you know, not being open to new ideas? I don't know. You know, we still have a small sample size in terms of his second stint. But I would say that's the biggest criticism, Mike. If you were to ask me about Gruden right now, then as far as an X's and O's standpoint, because I've seen potential out of this Raiders offense. I love what Darren Waller's been doing. I think Jacobs is a great weapon at the running back position. I think they have the pieces. They just need to shore up the end of game decisions, and that to me falls on the head coach.
So just like me, you do see a little Al Davis and John Gruden.
Oh, I think that's fair. Absolutely. And if you're talking about little Al Davis, I don't want to put words in your mouth, or you talk about the stubbornness quality.
How he wants to bring 70s football into the 2000s before he unfortunately passed away is what I mean. He wants to bring old school, bring it to you, but that's not today's game.
I think that's a very good synopsis and great analysis on your part. I would agree with you. I think that pretty much sums up the Raiders, where they've got the pieces, they've got the weaponry, they've got the potential, but the philosophy to me seems to be the missing link right now. And it's going to be interesting right now. On a quick side note, Gruden has now shaken up his staff, as you can attest to. You know, he's going to bring in now Gus Bradley as his defensive coordinator, who I thought did a nice job with the Chargers, and he was the previous head coach with Jacksonville. Let's see now if maybe some new voices steers Gruden to what we were just talking about in a different direction. Sometimes you need a new assistant to come in and change your thinking. Maybe that does it. If that doesn't do it, then once again, I think that points the fingers back at the head coach.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Stephen?
Yes. To transition into the other team that's in the Super Bowl this year, Tampa Bay. I remember when you were on the show with us back in August talking about previewing the season, you were not so hot on Tampa Bay at the beginning of the season, because to start the season, because they were the quote unquote new hottest team and people were high on them. You didn't think they would make a run, and it looked like they weren't, because at the first start of the season, they were really shaky. That game against New Orleans, and then the games that they ended up losing on and off during the season against Kansas City, against Green Bay, you know, all these, you know, different, you know, teams, and San Francisco and all this other stuff. And Tom Brady had a rough year at times throwing that football. And he did not look good. He looked old at times, but they finally have catched a streak. And what are your thoughts on Tampa Bay's season this year?
Well, I think the Bucs is the prime example of the type of team that needed time to get on the same page. And they were able to overcome some of those hurdles that you just outlined. My concern about Tampa Bay going into the season was you were bringing in a new quarterback, and he had to get used to the new personnel around him. And then on top of that, guys, if you recall, they had a number of injuries that they were dealing with too, guys right in and out of the lineup. So I think that's why Tampa Bay didn't click until the latter portion of the second half of the season. And I would argue they were playing their best football in the last 4 games of the season. Now, I think part of that was a reflection of the caliber of the opposition. They had 2 games against Atlanta. They were playing Detroit. But to your point, yeah, they're the true example of a team that gelled little by little. As far as my outlook of the team now, my concern with Tampa Bay, and I've said this every week of the postseason, I have no issue with their offense. I think they're more than capable of hanging with everybody. I think that Brady's much more comfortable with everybody around him. I like that Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones are providing a nice 1-2 punch in terms of the ground game. I think they're also showing some consistency as receivers in the backfield. My concern is they're very opportunistic this postseason. And I was looking at the numbers. They've had 7 takeaways over the course of their 3 playoff games. 6 of those 7 takeaways, they had legitimate chances to score following the takeaway, because the takeaway that I'm not including in this mathematics exercise for you guys is the one that ended the Saints game, because there was no need for them to have to score. The game was over at that point.
Yes.
Of those 6 takeaways, they scored a touchdown on all 6 of those takeaways. That's an unreal rate if you look at NFL turnover rate and then being able to capitalize. On top of that, if you look at the field position as a result of the takeaways, it shortened the field for Tom Brady and company. Now, can Brady and company march down the field 75 to 80 yards, guys? Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to doubt that. But when you tell an offense that you don't have to do that consistently during the course of a game, that's a little bit different than having to put together 4 or 5 75, 80-yard drives. The Bucs have not been put in a position when they've had to do that. So my concern is, what happens if the takeaways are not there on Sunday? And the Chiefs are not the type of team that coughs up the football. What is the true colors of this Tampa Bay offense? That's what I have yet to see from this group. They're able to score, but let's not forget the fact they're scoring a lot of their points off of takeaways in the postseason. What happens if you have to play a clean game? That I have yet to see.
Right. And, you talk about that. I'll bring this up because I went on a rant towards the beginning of this hour.
Yeah, we can call it that.
The Green Bay game. And I know on Mad Dog Radio the next day, Adam Shine and Chris Russo and all these different guys were just talking, and JC the Brick talked about on his show that very night on Sunday. What in the hell is Green Bay doing not going for it on 4th and goal from the 8-yard line? They were down by 8, 31-23, with 2 minutes plus change left to go in the game. If they scored the touchdown and they missed a 2-point conversion, they still have all of their 3 timeouts plus the 2-minute warning. And it was, to me, in a lot of people's eyes, it was bad coaching by Green Bay, and Aaron Rodgers not calling the audible because his coach was like, no, we're going to kick in it. Aaron Rodgers should have went to him and said, screw you, I'm Aaron effing Rodgers, and we're going for it, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I was still scratching my head hours after that game. Here's the best way that I could put that situation in perspective, Stephen, that you just mentioned. Chad Henne had more of an opportunity to help the Kansas City Chiefs beat the Cleveland Browns than Aaron Rodgers did to help the Green Bay Packers win a playoff game. Come on. I mean,
and they had 3 turnovers against Tom Brady. And you mean to tell me you couldn't capitalize but 1 touchdown? Come on.
Well, and that's the difference. See, that's why when you asked me about my outlook of the Bucs, I can't overlook the fact that they've capitalized off of other teams' mistakes. Whereas you're right, Green Bay, you have Tom Brady throw 3 interceptions. How many games does Tom Brady throw 3 interceptions and you can't capitalize? He's laying out the red carpet in a game where, by the way, the Packers turned the ball over 2 times. Green Bay guys coming into that game had the least amount of turnovers the entire season, 11. They played unreal football. And then this is the postseason for you, right? It's unpredictable. So all of the things were leaning towards Green Bay's way. You have a sloppy game, but Tampa Bay coughs up the ball. Yeah, Green Bay had every which opportunity, but here's the other thing that not enough people are talking about, by the way. It's not so much that Matt LaFleur decided to take the 3 points. I'm stunned. If you go back to the 2 plays prior to that, Aaron Rodgers, to me, had an opportunity to run not once, but twice.
Yes.
He had an alley, and he decided not to take that. So as much as I'm going to be critical, in fairness, of Matt LaFleur, I think a lot of people have to also be a little bit critical of Aaron Rodgers,
Yes.
a seasoned quarterback, for not seeing that alley and not trying to take advantage.
Right, because on the third down play, he's going to run and he said he has the alley to run, and he hesitates and throws the ball incomplete. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
And he, more often than not, we've seen Rodgers. Listen, is Rodgers Mahomes? Is he Lamar Jackson? No. But you're going to tell me Rodgers can't run the 5 to 7 yards that he needed to get to at worst, guys, put him at the 1 yard line. And then you wonder, does LaFleur's philosophy or outlook change when he can maybe just go for a quarterback sneak under those circumstances?
Mm-hmm.
HiJacker, you said we have a Discord exclusive, Discord server question.
Yeah, Lance, we got a question from Discord here for you. It comes from Stephen PA. He says, Lance, do you believe now is the time for the Bucs to unleash hell with Leonard Fournette?
Well, I think that's going to be a critical part of their game plan. I think if you play Kansas City, number one, you want to wear down their defense and you want to keep Mahomes on the sideline. So how do you do that? You do that by leaning on your run game. But I want to add a quick caveat to that, because to me, Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette, as I was talking about earlier, guys, are so effective as receivers out of the backfield, even though they have had the case of the dropsies as of late. To me, an extension of the run game is dumping it off to your running back. So when I say a heavy dose of Leonard Fournette, it doesn't have to be Leonard Fournette handing him the ball 18 times. It could be Leonard Fournette runs it 13 and then you target him 5 or 6 times. But I agree with the sentiments of the question where, yeah, I do think this is a game where I would want to lean on Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones. It just doesn't have to come on the ground. It should be a mix of short game through the air as well as the ground attack. And that, to me, is the way that you beat Kansas City. You got to win the battle in the trenches. Mm-hmm. If you keep Tom Brady clean, that's going to put more pressure on Patrick Mahomes. Now, the Chiefs could still win, even if Brady has a clean game. But why has Tampa Bay been winning during the course of the postseason? We talked about, guys, the takeaways and how opportunistic they've been. The other facet of why they've consistently been winning is they dominated the trenches against Drew Brees and the Saints. Drew Brees had no time, okay? He was rattled. That's why he threw turnovers. And then Aaron Rodgers. What happened? And this is what I love about the NFL. Quick side note. You go from seeing the Packers absolutely dominate the Rams, the number one scoring defense in the NFL. The Rams had the most sacks in the NFL this season. Aaron Rodgers is clean. He wasn't touched. He had one quarterback hit on Aaron Rodgers, no sacks. Then you flip the script forward 1 week. He goes up against the Bucs. He gets sacked 5 times. He gets hit multiple times. How the hell does that happen? Well, the bottom line is the Bucs dominated in the trenches, and the Rams couldn't do any of that. Aaron Donald was banged up. So my point is, if Tampa Bay can get to Mahomes a little bit, or vice versa, Kansas City gets to Brady, that to me is going to be a significant storyline in this game, because Mahomes and the Chiefs offense are more than capable of making up for the sacks. Brady and the Bucs offense, I'm not as confident. So that's where, to me, the difference in this game could lie.
Sticking with the Super Bowl, it's been talked a lot now that, Brady wins to be the first time he wins under a new head coach. If that were to happen and Monday morning we hear Tom Brady wins another Super Bowl, does that diminish what happened in New England at all? Well, let me rephrase it. Does that diminish Belichick at all?
No, not at all. I mean, it goes back to, John, what I was talking about with Andy Reid. Belichick has been so consistent. And remember, Belichick also, people don't give him enough credit for what he did in Cleveland, okay? Well before he became the Patriots head coach. If you go back and you look at what he did with the Browns, that was the last time that they actually had some respectable football in Cleveland until Kevin Stefanski came along, which has been quite some time. So Belichick, and then also you look at what Belichick did as the Giants defensive coordinator. I think he's made a name for himself even before New England, John, that if Brady goes on to win elsewhere, I don't look at it as, oh my God, this diminishes Belichick. On top of that, okay, let me throw on a few more layers. When Brady goes down in 2008, he has to turn to Matt Castle. They win 11 games. So they clearly were strategizing correctly then. Granted, I know New England didn't make the playoffs, but let's face it, more often than not, your team wins 11 games, you're going to the playoffs. And then on top of that, when Brady gets suspended for 4 games a few seasons ago, he turns to Jimmy Garoppolo and Jacoby Brissett in the first 4 games, and they go 3-1. So Belichick has proven that maybe over the course of a 16-game season consistently, he hasn't won with a quarterback not named Brady, which of course we saw this year, the struggles, but he's shown flashes where they could strategize and they could do things to make up for not having Tom Brady. So no, I don't think it at all changes the conversation whatsoever. It clearly elevates Brady, John, which I know wasn't your question, but for Belichick, I don't think Belichick is harmed in any way. No.
All right, I want to take a quick side step away from the Super Bowl. I want to talk about the 2 New York teams for a second. Quickly with the Jets, we had Danielle McCartan on. We did an interview on Monday, and we asked her, I want to ask you as well, does Deshaun Watson become a Jet?
Well, if I'm the Houston Texans, I'm not trading Deshaun Watson. And I think it's absolutely crazy and nuts that the Houston Texans would even consider trading Deshaun Watson. Now, that may not be the reality of the circumstances, but when you find a franchise quarterback or somebody that's capable, let me phrase it this way, of being your quarterback for well over a decade, your answer can't be, and I'm speaking more from a fan perspective, your answer can't be, well, we'll get a few high draft picks and we'll take another quarterback. Can you tell me for a fact that that player is going to become Deshaun Watson in 3 to 4 years?
No.
Unless you have a crystal ball, you can't. So if I'm the Texans, you got a new head coach, you got a new GM. Those 2 guys, the last time I checked, were not anywhere near Deshaun Watson over the last few years. He has no relationship with either one of them. So if I'm Deshaun Watson, I'm saying to myself, let me see what David Culley and Nick Caserio can do. Let me get to know them. Let me see what their philosophy is. Regardless of what went on with Bill O'Brien previously and anybody else who worked for the Houston Texans organization. So if I'm Houston, I'm not getting rid of him. Now, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the reality. As far as the Jets' chances, they would have to blow away the Houston Texans, John, in order for the Jets to realistically get Deshaun Watson. And here's another thing as to why I don't think the Jets would get Deshaun Watson. I think Robert Saleh, who came over from the San Francisco 49ers, their defensive coordinator, I think he comes from the philosophy of, I've been with San Francisco over the last few years. We went to a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. We had chances to win football games with Nick Mullins and Beathard, okay? Now, does that happen everywhere you go? No. My point is, I think he's a believer in, we play fundamentally sound defense. We keep offenses low scoring that we're playing. We can win football games with Sam Darnold. If we continue to surround him with talent, we don't have to be the number 1 scoring offense in the NFL. We could be a very good defensive-minded team, and we could be similar to San Francisco, where we may not win by blowouts, we may not win pretty, but we'll put our position in to win games. And that's why I don't think he's a believer in let's give up all these assets for a star quarterback.
Absolutely. Carl, do you have any final questions?
I have 2 questions for you, Lance. And the one, it's probably going to, I would say, shock a lot of people with my question is, but first off, what team this year do you think was a sleeper, known as they were a bust from the beginning? And my second question is, how did you feel about the way the Browns have played all season up until the playoffs?
I think Kevin Stefanski has done a fantastic job just changing the philosophy of what's going on in the locker room and also how he's constructed the roster as well as the offense. I've been knowing of Kevin Stefanski going back to when he was in the Ivy League. So, I mean, this guy has paid his dues. He was a longtime assistant with the Minnesota Vikings. I really like the job that he and Andrew Berry, the new general manager, have done. Now, it's 1 year, Carl, so we're not throwing a parade in Cleveland, okay? We've got to have perspective here because we've seen other coaches, right? They come in year 1, impressive, and then all of a sudden, it's hard to duplicate. But I like how he has constructed the offense. I think he's done a really good job molding Baker Mayfield. Remember, Baker had a very rough season last year, and part of why Baker struggled was, yes, the offensive line was a mess, but I also think his fundamentals got out of whack. And I think Kevin Stefanski and company, I think got him to a point where he could be more comfortable playing that position. So I really like what he's instilled and what he's implemented. But the key for him now is going to be, how do we maintain that consistency? That's going to be the next test. They've got a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. They're going to have to make tough decisions when they have to give out contracts to some of these young players. But all in all, I think if you're a Browns fan, you should be optimistic, because I don't think they won by fluky plays. I don't think they won by luck. I think when you look at some of the games they won this year, they were doing things consistently. And that's what I always look for in a team. Did you win with trickery? Did you win because you were so opportunistic with the takeaways that we were talking about with Tampa Bay? Or did you do the fundamentally sound things? I think Cleveland's more of the latter than the former. So that's why I think they're in position to at least build off of what they constructed this season. As far as sleeper team, very interesting question, Carl. I mean, I haven't necessarily given it a great deal of thought. One team that comes to mind that I personally was high on, I know a lot of other people weren't, so I do think they fall under the sleeper umbrella. I loved what the Indianapolis Colts did this year. I don't think a lot of people felt that, Phillip Rivers is going to come in. He's old. He's worn out. He hasn't made good decisions with the Chargers. I've been arguing all these years, well, give him an offensive line, give him a consistent run game, and see what a veteran like him could do. I thought they've got a lot of good defensive personnel. Matt Eberflus, we were talking earlier about Eric Bieniemy. I'm surprised Eberflus didn't get a head coaching gig. I think he's done a really good job with that Indianapolis defense over the last few seasons. So I thought the Colts, everybody said the Texans were the team to beat. Tennessee is going to duplicate. Nobody was talking about Indianapolis. And I said, guys, don't overlook the Colts. You've got a good structure there with Frank Reich. You've got a good group of running backs with an offensive line surrounding Phillip Rivers. They've got an underrated defense. And, they did a really nice job playing consistent football. And it wasn't pretty all season. They had to overcome some early issues here or there. But I thought Indianapolis did fall under that umbrella, and I think they met and exceeded expectations, if you were to ask me.
Absolutely. Hijacker, I think we have 2 questions from Discord.
Yeah, Lance, we have one of our show elite here. Marks from New Mexico has a couple questions for you. I'll read them together for you. What's one team that made the playoffs that will miss the playoffs next year? And what's one team that missed the playoffs this year that will make it next year?
One of my favorite questions. It's one of my favorite statistics that I throw out. No, it's a great question, by the way, because I bring this stat up all the time. I don't think enough individuals realize. Do you know, guys, there's an average of about 5 new teams that make the playoffs every single year that have missed the playoffs the previous year? There were, I believe, 7 new postseason teams in the mix this year. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, they added 2 more playoff spots. But you know what? That's actually been the average. We've seen years. I went back to when the Patriots began their dynasty. There's been years, 7 new playoff teams, 8 new playoff teams. I mean, we've seen it. So the turnover rate in the NFL is quite ridiculous. I'm just going to bring up the postseason chart. So just bear with me, only because I like to visually look, just so that I don't overlook a team or I give a team the benefit of the doubt to see who potentially could wind up missing the playoffs. Let's start with the AFC. Me. Yes, visual aids. It always helps.
Yes.
Yes, I think we could all relate from that standpoint. I would say in the AFC, the team that I would be concerned about is Tennessee. And the reason why I'm concerned about Tennessee is I think they're going to have some really tough salary cap decisions that they're going to have to make. Remember, they locked up Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill, okay? So now you can't retain the defensive back that you would hope. You can't retain the offensive lineman. They lost some personnel this year. Logan Ryan, for example, was a guy that didn't return, who I thought was a valuable component of their defense. He went over to the Giants, a team I cover very closely, and he proved to be an excellent addition to the back end of their defense. I'm a little bit worried that the Titans are going to lose even more personnel this year, which is going to put pressure on their front office to draft well. And I'm not saying that they're not capable, but once again, Tennessee's a team. It's not about the coaches, because I think Mike Vrabel's done a really good job. But remember, Arthur Smith, their offensive coordinator, is now in Atlanta. So you're promoted from within. Okay, that's great from a continuity standpoint. But Arthur Smith's done a really good job. Arthur Smith's not going to be on the sideline anymore holding anybody's hand. What happens? Tennessee, I think, is a strong candidate to miss the playoffs next year after making it this year. Now, we go over to the NFC. The NFC, if there was a team that would come to mind, well, the Rams would have been maybe the first one, but now that they made the trade for Matthew Stafford, I feel good. And that defense is very strong. So I'm not overly concerned about that group. The NFC East is probably where I should go because one of my other favorite stats, guys, is the fact that nobody's won back-to-back NFC East titles since the Eagles won 4 in a row in the early 2000s. So just by default, I think Washington has a tough go of making the playoffs. But you know what? That's low-hanging fruit, okay? And we want to challenge everybody on this program, okay? So I'm not going to let myself out so easily, okay? So if there's a team that is going to miss out on the postseason next year, as I look over the list here, I'm going to really go out on a limb here, okay? And you, Carl, mentioned that the question that you were posing to me a few minutes ago was going to be a surprise. I'm going to say the Seattle Seahawks could very well miss the playoffs. Yeah.
Ooh,
And here's why.
I think.
It's similar to Tennessee. I think we're starting to see a transition with the Seahawks where you're losing personnel. They changed offensive coordinators. Remember, Brian Schottenheimer's not there anymore.
Mhm.
So, you're starting to see some concern. And look at the Seahawks offense, guys. Started off red hot, right? We were talking about Russell Wilson being an MVP.
Yes.
And then in the second half of the season, there were some individuals that were concerned about whether or not they would be able to survive and make the playoffs. And then that showed up, right? Look at what the Rams defense did to Russell Wilson and company. Jared Goff was not healthy. They lose John Wolford at the beginning of the game, and the Rams didn't miss a beat.
Yeah.
So you look at Seattle's defense, I also thought started off sluggish. They lost a lot of guys due to injury. Then they came back. They were very much Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They're running backs in and out of the lineup. The offensive line, I don't think really has ever been a true strength of that team during Russell Wilson's tenure. You look, he's been sacked more so than most quarterbacks. So if you want a curveball here, and it's early, okay? I'm going to date myself. It's February 4th, 2021. So if you bring this back out of the archives, okay, a year from now, that's fine, okay? I'll sip on my own medication, guys, okay? But you know what? It's time to think outside the box. I'm going to go with Seattle in the NFC.
You might not be wrong, Lance. Wow.
Oof.
Oof. I have a two-part
That's
question.
good. I'm glad that I got you guys breathing a little bit harder. That was my goal.
I have a two-part question for you because you brought up during the beginning of this interview that Pittsburgh was a huge disappointment with the way they finished this season. Who for you that you thought was also going to make a playoff run, that was going to make a deep playoff run that didn't do it? And then my second question is, what was your favorite game of the year this year?
Wow, favorite game of the year. Ooh,
Mm-mm.
that's an interesting one. Tampa Bay, Kansas City, I thought because it's now the rematch in the Super Bowl, the Bucs made the game interesting late after Kansas City jumped out to a 17-0 lead. So, that was a game I was at least looking forward to on paper because of the marquee matchup of the quarterbacks and obviously both teams. So, that would be maybe one candidate. I'm trying to think of what else was great. I did a lot of post-game shows after the Thursday night games, which I was extremely disappointed with. And the Monday night games weren't that much better. But there was one Monday night game, I feel, that came down to the wire that is just maybe at the tip of my tongue, but I'm not recalling. Maybe we'll come back to that. And I'll have to look over the schedule of all the Monday night games. There was one game that I didn't anticipate that maybe it even scraping the surface of perhaps an overtime affair and then turned out to be an overtime affair that I thought was a very entertaining game. But the matchup is not coming to my mind. As far as the first question about which team that I expected to make a deep postseason run and then it never came to fruition, I would point to the Arizona Cardinals. I was very high on the Arizona Cardinals, and I picked them to go to the playoffs. I thought we could have seen 3 teams from the NFC West. And, we were close, guys. Listen, the Cardinals were in a position to make the playoffs the final week. So it wasn't that far-fetched. And they were playing good football at stretches, but then, when they really needed to play their best, it seemed to have just fallen apart. So Arizona, I thought overall was a disappointment. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, Cliff Kingsbury's second year, Kyler Murray's second year, considering where they finished in year one, the fact that they finished 8-8, maybe somewhat a step in the right direction, but that team was in a position to finish over 500. It wasn't as if they started 0-5 and made this dramatic comeback. So the Cardinals is a team that absolutely comes to mind that I had higher hopes, and they did not carry that out into the postseason. If you're asking me, though, for a team that actually made the playoffs and didn't perhaps come through, I would probably point to the Green Bay Packers not making the Super Bowl, because I think with the way they were playing all season and the position they were in the NFC Championship game, of course, that I thought they had all the ingredients to get into the Super Bowl. So, I mean, I think the fact that now they've made back-to-back NFC Championship games, now granted, they were beat up by San Francisco, so they didn't really have a legitimate chance to win that game last year. But, this year, I don't think you could have asked for a better opportunity. Brady turns the ball over 3 times. You're more than capable of running the football effectively. You've got Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Yeah, I mean, I think Green Bay is the team probably that made the playoffs. Disappointment that they didn't make the Super Bowl.
Yes.
It's funny you bring up Green Bay, because as mentioned before, Steven had a rant on them, and I sort of had a quasi rant on them when it comes to Aaron Rodgers. Am I off by saying that Aaron Rodgers is no better than Tony Romo? In the sense that Aaron Rodgers in the regular season is phenomenal. In the postseason, he becomes very not him almost.
See, I'm very high on Tony Romo. I am a Romo defender. So I look at Romo in a probably stronger light than the 5 of you, or the 4 of you, excuse me. I'm going to take a guess. So, when you throw out Tony Romo, I don't think that's an insult. I think Romo had a heck of a career, and I think he's one of the most underrated, if not the most underrated quarterback in NFL history. I'll go so far to say that. And the reason being, and John, I'll get back to your question. I'm not trying to avoid it.
No,
I mean, hell, I picked the Seahawks missing the playoffs, guys. I'm not dancing around anything. Romo, I would argue, if he doesn't make some of the plays that he made during the course of his career late in seasons, the Cowboys don't even have an opportunity to play a meaningful game in Week 17 or get a taste of the playoffs. There was a game against Washington one season where, if you remember, it was the year he hurt his back, and then Kyle Orton started against the Eagles in the NFC Championship game the following week.
Yep.
If you remember, guys, they were trailing in that game. He throws it into the flat to DeMarco Murray. Murray runs in for the late go-ahead touchdown. The Cowboys lose that game. There is no meaningful game in Week 17. Nobody talks about that. That's all Romo. Romo is also the quarterback that helped position the Cowboys into other do-or-die games, I would argue, in Week 17. There was a game against the Denver Broncos, if you recall. I think
the high-scoring game with Peyton.
The high-scoring game, Steve. Remember that game where they went into the 50s? The Dallas defense did nothing.
55-50, right? Something like that.
Exactly. Now, Romo threw an interception late. Okay, I figured maybe one of you were going to bring that up. I remember. Okay, I'm not shying away from that. But once again, if Romo doesn't do what he does offensively in that game, are they even in a position on the final drive to help themselves? Now, I can bore you to details with all those examples.
No. You're not wrong, because if he doesn't make some of the mistakes that he made, you can make the argument that they could have a chance to be in one of these big time games. I mean, look at the playoff game against Green Bay in 2014. The controversial no catch with Des Bryant. I mean, that was
perfect example.
That game.
And that was going to be my next one. That is a great example. Well, how about this? Not just the Des Bryant catch, no catch. You know what also happened in that game that people never bring up? DeMarco Murray, when the Cowboys are marching down the field, fumbles the ball. Green Bay takes over. If you go back, Steven, that was a huge turning point in that game.
Yes.
Nobody brings that up. Nobody talks about that. There's tons of other things other than the Des Bryant play that influenced the outcome of that game.
Yep.
So you could go back and forth a number of Tony Romo examples. So to bring it back full circle, I look at Romo as an underrated quarterback. Now, as far as the comparison of Aaron Rodgers to Tony Romo, that I think is going a little too far, John, okay? Because we're talking about Aaron Rodgers. Let's take away team success or the lack thereof with Green Bay. You're talking about arguably the greatest quarterback in NFL history with touchdown to interception ratio. Nobody does a better job making decisions in the flow of a game, I would argue. I mean, you even put him up there with Tom Brady, then Aaron Rodgers. You go into every game with Aaron as your starting quarterback. How many times do you go in worried about, oh, this is going to be the game where Aaron throws 3 interceptions, or this is going to be the game where Aaron throws 2 interceptions? I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, how many games has Aaron Rodgers even had multi-interceptions? I'd say I probably need one hand to probably give you the answer, maybe an additional finger. So that alone puts him on a stratosphere with not many other quarterbacks. And Romo, remember, Romo had his fair share of issues with turnovers throughout the course of his career. Steven, we were just talking about that. So, I mean, that separates the two of them right there. And here's the other thing. And I may be in the minority of this. I sound like a broken record on every program that I host. I don't know about you guys. I hate quarterback records. Okay. We really need to stop talking about
you are correct.
Yep.
I can't stand it. I hate the fact that we assign a record to a quarterback. Once again, you want to talk about that for Jordan, LeBron? That's fine, guys, because those two guys had far more influence on defense and offense. But there's only so much, we were just talking about, that Romo could do. There's only so much that Rodgers could do when you have a Swiss cheese defense or your kicker misses a field goal.
Yep.
Okay, these guys are human at the end of the day. So I want to stop the narrative and the conversation about, well, you know, this guy is 5-2 when he plays this guy. Well, when Brady goes out there and suits up as a safety in a corner, then let's talk about quarterbacks against quarterbacks and let's throw out records. But until that happens, I don't want to hear it.
And Lance, and I'll make the argument right now too. Talk about the Sunday Super Bowl. Honest to God, Patrick Mahomes has nothing to lose. What has this guy done in his 3 years as a starter? He's won an MVP, took his team to 3 AFC championship games. They already won a Super Bowl. He's the Super Bowl MVP. Hell of a quarterback, hell of a talent. He has nothing to lose. The kid's 25 years old, not even 26. I mean, and if he loses the Super Bowl, oh, well, he has a championship, because some quarterbacks like Dan Marino can't even say, Jim Kelly can't even say they don't have a Super Bowl, because Super Bowl or not, a great quarterback is a great quarterback.
100%. And Rodgers is a great quarterback. I don't think any of us are going to question that, and any of us are going to debate that. Plus, you go back to, and this piggybacks right off of your point, Steven. Let's look at Aaron Rodgers this year, okay? What everybody's going to remember when we have this conversation 10 years ago, and I ask you, what happened in the 2020 season for the Green Bay Packers? Well, we're going to talk about maybe Aaron Rodgers winning MVP. We're going to talk about how they were the best team in the NFC record-wise, and they earned home field advantage.
Yep.
But how many people are going to bring up Matt LaFleur's decision to take the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands with him having a chance to maybe force overtime and tie that game? Nobody's going to talk about that. But Aaron gets the loss. And I'm not saying that Aaron played great, okay? Don't misinterpret my words. Aaron has a responsibility for why the Packers lost that game. That wasn't his best game. But my point is that context doesn't show up when we just give you Aaron Rodgers' record or the things that we talked about in great detail with Tony Romo. You have to remember that. That's the optics. That's the memory test. That's nowhere to be found when we just randomly throw out a record of a quarterback. So I would want more substantive conversation when we have this dialogue about where you put Aaron Rodgers or where you put Tony Romo. And I just don't want people turning to, well, this guy won this amount of games or this guy won this amount of playoff games. Well, talk to me about all the other things that the guy did to help his team keep its head above water to even discuss the playoffs or keep the playoffs within striking distance. That doesn't show up within a record.
Right.
Carl?
So, Lance, my question for you as a New Yorker, I'm going to touch very tightly on this one, but what did you think of the way New England was positioned with players and everything this year?
You're talking about the structure of the roster for the Patriots?
Yes, sir.
Well, the first thing that hurt them and was just a smack in the face was all the quality players, Carl, that opted out. Nobody even talks about that. And once again, this is not an excuse, but New England, I think, was probably the hardest hit. If you were to ask me, if we go back and we look at all the players that opted out, I'd say New England lost probably the most quality talent. We're not just talking about the third offensive lineman or the third wide receiver. We're talking about starting legitimate defensive players, right? Hightower, Chung on defense. I mean, those are two guys that come off the top of my head. Cannon on the offensive line, if memory serves me correctly as well. I mean, those are three starters right there I just named, guys. So that was the first thing, Carl, that just hit them hard. And that put them in a very precarious spot because remember, by the time those guys opt out, and New England did have a lot of cap space to work with anyway. That's one of the reasons why they had to part ways with some talent. So that was damaging blow number one. I liked the move, and I thought it was a great bargain for what they brought in Cam for. I think most people and most teams would sign up for that, right? I mean, compared to what they were working with, right? Jarrett Stidham and Brian Hoyer, none of those guys proved that they could be a starter for 16 games. Clearly, Bill Belichick and the New England staff wasn't even sold. That's why they made the late move for Cam. But you look at, this goes back to the conversations we had about Brady last season. What was Cam working with? Didn't have a whole lot of talent. Then Julian Edelman gets hurt, who's probably the most consistent weapon within the offensive personnel grouping. And while I think their defense was still solid, despite losing some of those guys, that's Stephon Gilmore, but then Gilmore you lose. He gets hurt late in the season. He was in and out of the lineup. So I guess circling back to your question, Carl, I don't know if I would blame the Patriots organization for being ill-prepared. I just think they got bit by the opt-out and they got bit by a season unlike anything else and tried to make the best of it. This is, though, a critical offseason. If there's any team you were to ask me that I'm monitoring very closely about how they're going to navigate the offseason, because this offseason, the Patriots have some moolah, okay? So you can't point to the lack of resources. The draft, that goes without saying, is going to be critical in trying to find the future quarterback. But I want to see them also bring in a veteran. And I've been throwing this out. I think Andy Dalton makes a lot of sense in New England with a young quarterback. I'd like to see some combination of that. And that, I think, is that going to hand them the NFC East title? No. But I think it elevates them. I think you could do a lot worse than Andy Dalton. And I think that was a great signing by the Cowboys, by the way, this year. And it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, given the unfortunate injury to Dak. So this is a huge offseason for the Patriots here.
Absolutely. Lance, one thing I want to get to is overall with the Super Bowl coming up, what's one key thing that people should look out for, in your opinion?
With respect to just the flow of the game, you're talking
about?
the
flow of the game, and like one thing that basically what should they be paying attention in this game?
Well, I think the trenches, which I alluded to earlier, John, I mean, that would be my first focus, because I do think if Kansas City can get the better of that Tampa Bay offensive line, and I'm not talking about sacks, I'm just saying if they can hit Brady, make him feel uncomfortable. I think we've seen, based on what the Giants did and what the Eagles did in the Super Bowl, and even if you go back to some of the teams, guys, earlier this season that played Tampa Bay, if you remember that Bears game, I think that was the Thursday night game, right? Yes. Chicago held Tampa Bay. I want to say the final score was 19-17 off the top of my head.
That is correct.
Okay? Well, there you go. Kudos to myself. It's amazing what I can remember. I have not lost my touch. So if they could get hits on Brady, that to me is going to be a huge storyline. And the Chiefs have the big boys to do that. The Chris Jones, the Passignos, the guys on the interior. So I would certainly look out for that. The reason why I'm not so worried about that on the flip side is San Francisco. I actually went back. I looked at the numbers. The Niners sacked Patrick Mahomes 4 times in last year's Super Bowl. And then the Chiefs wound up winning by 11. That's right. San Francisco, for 3.5 quarters, they had the Chiefs exactly where they needed. And then Kansas City said, thank you very much. We'll take it from there. So that's the great magic of Patrick Mahomes. You think you get the better of him, and then blink of an eye, all of a sudden they make up for it. That's why I'm not too overly concerned about what happens in the trenches on the Kansas City side, even though the Chiefs' offensive line is a little bit banged up. I'm more looking at what the Chiefs' defense does against the Tampa Bay offensive line. That, to me, is something I think you have to watch the entire game. Then I think the facet for the Bucs on offense is, we were talking about the run game. I actually look at it as who outside of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans can make plays? Because even if Antonio Brown doesn't play, he's not healthy. Notice Scotty Miller and Tyler Johnson. If you look at the three playoff games, I should say, that the Bucs have played, one of those guys have flashed here or there, and I would say it came at a critical moment. Because of Kansas City's prolific scoring, you need all hands on deck, and you need somebody to make a play above the X's and O's that's not one of your usual suspects, for the lack of a better phrase. So that's why I'm saying somebody not named Mike Evans, not named Chris Godwin. Tyler Johnson, Scotty Miller. I'll throw in Cameron Brate there. I mean, Brate's a solid player, but I think he falls under that umbrella. Ronald Jones, an explosive play, something that you're not expecting. Tampa Bay needs one or two of those plays, I think, to win this game, in addition to winning in the trenches. So those are the two items, John, to answer your question, that I'd be monitoring.
All right, Hijacker, I know we have one final question. I know what the question is, so let's go with this.
Oh,
No, it's not the famous one. It's another one.
Oh, come on. We have to ask that one.
This is quite the introduction if you're all chuckling before he even asks the question.
No, we got Joe in North Carolina on Discord wants to ask you, if you're up for a lighthearted question, what's more painful, being a Jets fan or eating glass?
oh.
Well, here's the thing. See, I'm not a Jets fan, so I can't speak from experience, guys, but I've heard from many Jets fans. I would say I'll lean towards eating glass, okay? And maybe that's the chicken answer. But, you know, as somebody that loves sports, is passionate about sports, and understands the fandom lens, I think we often need perspective in this conversation. And there's far worse things in my mind that you could suffer, as opposed to watching your team have to win 2 games at the end of the season. I mean, my thoughts and prayers are with Jets fans that you didn't get the number 1 overall pick. Oh, my God. So that's why my response would be munching on a few pieces of glass, I would say, is far more painful than rooting for any sports team.
All right, let's go. Let's just transition to the food question quickly before we wrap up this interview for tonight. We always ask our guests on the other show, and figure why not ask you as well. What are your thoughts on pineapple on pizza?
Say that again. I heard you cut out something pizza.
What's your thoughts on pineapple on pizza?
Pineapple on pizza. Okay. I'm a pizza lover, okay? And I like my fair share of varied pizzas. I will put most toppings on. But fruit and pizza do not belong together, okay? There is room for creativity, guys, okay? And I'm all for creativity, and I pride myself on having a decent palate, okay? It molded over time. All right? I didn't come out of the womb and immediately love everything, okay? But pineapple on pizza? Come on. I mean, what are we talking about here? Cheeses, meats, appetizers? I'm all for. Fruit and pizza do not belong together. You want to eat fruit before you have the main course? I'm all for that. You want to have a few pieces of pineapple as a refresher to cleanse the palate? Hey, guys, sign me up for that, okay? But then the pineapple gets moved out of the way, and then we reset the table, okay? The silverware, the napkins, and then we put the pizza at the center of the table, and we have our main meal. And the pineapple is nowhere to be found. End of discussion.
We only asked that question because this is somebody you may know very well. Dave LaGreca has got on a few rants on Busted Open about pizza.
Well, is he pro or con?
He's against it. It's basically cheese, bread, the crust, and sauce and cheese, and that's it.
Yeah.
Dave LaGreca's regular guy pie. Sauce, cheese, meat. That's it.
So, meaning he's not even open. This is fascinating. Now I'm going to ask you some questions. He's not open.
Go ahead.
What about like vegetables? Is he open to that?
Sauce, meat, cheese.
So,
well, because
it's originally a plain pizza is all he started out his rant with.
Wow. Okay. Because see, I'm a mushroom pizza guy. I like, some vegetables or some other assortments, which are not necessarily meats. I'll be open to that. So I thought maybe he would be open to that. We'll have to sit him down and have him taste.
However,
yes,
he did have a Hawaiian pizza. He
Now,
went
was that by choice or being forced into that?
it was a bet.
Okay.
He went to a concert here in Jersey, and he had a Hawaiian pizza with the band because they were from California. And there is proof of him eating pineapple on a pizza, and he went right into a rant from there.
Do we know how much of it he consumed? Do we have any
An
visual
entire
evidence?
slice. An entire slice.
Okay. Wow. So you know what? I give Dave LaGreca some credit because he's speaking from experience. His rant comes, from actually consuming it to a certain degree.
Well, originally the rant happened before he consumed the slice.
So I stand corrected then. But I'm in alliance with Dave. So, he and I see eye to eye in terms of the pineapple. I'd like to see him explore a little bit more with the topping, but I'm definitely anti-pineapple.
I'm a meat lover.
Well, there you go, Carl. So
give me meat. I'm good.
I love any vegetables in my pizza, so sign me up with that, Lance.
Hey, all right. So, listen, if we want to make this a pizza party at some point, guys, I'm open to that. That's not a problem.
give me chicken, roasted garlic, jalapenos, and chopped tomatoes, and I'm cool right there.
Great.
Take
Now I want pizza
jalapenos off,
tomorrow.
and I'll be there with you.
Great. Now
I'll take one too.
Great. Now I want pizza now.
You guys are actually making me hungry too. Maybe it's a good thing I had an earlier lunch, so now I can consume dinner after I get done with it.
Go.
Oh wow, thanks, Carl. I appreciate it.
Lance,
to rub
Dude,
it
I'm
in a
sitting
little
here
bit more.
going,
Yeah.
I smell this pizza. I want it. I want it.
Now, damn it, I need it now.
Lance, last question. Looking at the Super Bowl on Sunday, what's your prediction? Who do you see coming out on top?
I like the Chiefs winning a close game. I think it'll be decided within a touchdown. I think it'll come down to about 3 or 4 points, similar to the regular season meeting. And the reason why I like Kansas City goes back to some of the things we hit on. Number one, and listen, I could very well be wrong, but I'm not banking on Tampa Bay getting the turnovers that it's relied on the previous games. And if that doesn't happen and they don't have a shortened field, can you see Tampa Bay putting on an offensive clinic? My answer is no. I do think they're capable of putting points on the board on this Kansas City defense. So I'm not going to expect a low-scoring field goal battle, but I'm concerned about what they could do on the offensive side of the ball if they don't get the takeaways. And then the second thing is the pass protection because of Brady's limited mobility, and Kansas City's gotten home. They put pressure on Josh Allen, and they flustered him a little bit. Remember all the sacks Allen took where he ran backwards more so than forwards? So that concerns me too. And I think those two elements are going to be the difference makers in giving Kansas City the slight edge.
Well, we're gonna get into our Super Bowl predictions in a second here, but Lance, want to thank you so much for being our first live guest
Nice.
on the sports show. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up?
Well, they can find me on social media, on Twitter. They can follow me at Lance Medow, one word, last name, Medow. Always make sure the spelling counts, okay? Don't be throwing an A in my last name, even though a lot of people like to do that. So that's why we emphasize the spelling. And as far as programming-wise, I am on Mad Dog Sports Radio, Channel 82, every Saturday and Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern, and that goes all year long. So look forward to interacting with sports fans and all topics that I cover on that show. They could also hear me on NFL radio. I host a variety of shows there too. I'm on Giants.com all season long, as well as the Giants Radio Network. I mean, I don't know how much time we have left on the program. I go through my whole resume, but I can tell I'm already losing the focus of all four of you. So
I'm sorry, I'm a New England fan.
Well, that's what I figured. I mean, I could tell we don't have any Giants people in this room because I didn't see any pom-poms going up. All right, well, John counts.
Hello.
Is Eli
Mind
coming
you,
back?
Lance, I live in Jersey, and I'm a New England fan.
Well, I could, Mike, if I had a nickel for every time a Giants fan called up and asked me if Eli's coming back after they get frustrated over a Daniel Jones turnover, I wouldn't even have time for you guys on this program anymore. I'd be sitting on my yacht somewhere and mumbling to myself. So there you go. But yes, they can follow me on Twitter, and they could see all the programming and all the other activities that I'm involved in.
Lance, thank you so much again. You have an open invite anytime you want to come back on. We definitely want to have you on again.
I appreciate it, guys. It's always a blast talking football and sports. And A little disappointed they didn't get a wrestling question, but I guess I'll survive. It's okay. I know where I lie. I'm honored. And I want the record to show this. I'm honored that I made it on before Zig Fracazzi, who I believe has made an appearance on the show. So every time that Zig comes up, just make sure you remind him. Lance Medow was on the program as the first live guest before his underrated brilliance joined this program. Let the record speak for all of that. And I'll leave it at that.
And Lance,
Guys,
I'll just say this too, Lance. You do have an open invitation to come back onto the Nation show and talk some wrestling, because I know you were an old school wrestling fan back.
There you go, Steven. You remembered correctly. See, I can't help you with the current landscape, but when it comes old school stuff, I'll be more than happy to weigh in. No doubt about it.
And when you come back, I'll have to share a story of my short heyday as trying out in the NFL back in the late 90s.
Well, that'll be something, Mike. Now you really put me at the edge of my seat.
Oh, well, here, if we got a quick second, 96, I went to New England as a walk-on to try out. Bledsoe was the baby there. I'm getting my ass handed to me as a linebacker trying to blitz between those big 6'5", 320-pound offensive linemen. I accidentally get through on one shot and hit the quarterback. He throws the ball at me. The offensive line surrounds me. I think I'm going to get my ass kicked. And Bill Parcells comes running through, grabs my face mask, and he's yelling in my face and spitting, "What the F are you doing to my quarterback?" and this and that. And I thought I was going to die and get shipped back to California in a body bag. I ended up riding the pine the rest of that tryout. And one of the coaches came over and said, "Yeah, we're sending you home. You kind of did a bad thing there and hit the $1 million baby."
Not the $1 million man.
Well, in terms, yeah, they're $1 million. Well, because he just signed that big contract with them, and I think at that time that was one of the biggest contracts signed in the NFL in the 90s. You know, because guys weren't getting paid like we are today, or they are today.
Yeah.
But yeah, I came through, kind of couldn't get the brakes on, man. At that time, 5'11", 245 coming through blitz. Yeah.
Well, just think about this. You wouldn't have had the opportunity to debate whether or not pineapple on pizza is good or bad had you had success on the NFL. So just think how gracious somebody up there was to you, Mike, that, this was far more important for you to discuss than, anything else that you could have achieved on the football field. Though I can only imagine, Mike, what it was like then for you to have to watch the Patriots go on and build a dynasty. And if you're a Raiders fan, to then have it come at the expense of your team, by the way.
This is true.
Yeah. Yeah, that hurts.
Boy,
it
that's
still
rough.
hurts, man.
Boy, yeah.
But I don't know what the highlight was, hitting Bledsoe or getting spit on by Parcells in his rant about me hitting his quarterback.
Well, I don't know. You could go either way. I'll have to put a poll question up on one of my future shows. We'll get the nation to weigh in on that. So, guys, listen, had a blast. Really appreciate you having me on. Take care.
Thank you,
sir.
You guys. Take care.